I won't be able to top that, guys.
Tú hablas español muy bien.
Hola, hola, amigos. Gracias.
Great. So my name is Patrick Osborne. I'm Vice President of Big Data and Secondary Storage. I've met a lot of you folks before in the past. I've been at HPE for about almost 10 years at this point. And,
Vish Mulchand, Senior Director of Product Management for HPE 3PAR. Good to see many of you again, familiar faces. And I've been in HPE as long as Pat, maybe even longer. Maybe.
Great. So, we had does everyone have the press release or no? No.
Some came to
Thing we did a couple weeks ago,
Okay,
but I
great.
think given a high level of the announcement would be a good place to start.
Yeah, so today we issued a press release around storage, intelligent storage and data management, in fact. And there's some key pillars to this. So you can have access to, I think it's out of embargo right now. It went out at 8:30 this morning, so you guys can see the press release if you want to bring it up. But a number of advancements around our artificial intelligence AI ops platform for info sites. We've done quite a bit of expansion in there. Not so much from a platform perspective, although we did 2 weeks ago announce extension of InfoSite onto the servers from HPE, so support for ProLiant and Apollo server lines. We have a number of other things that we've brought to market around InfoSite. For those of you who's familiar with HPE Cloud Volumes, it's our as a service storage offering. We have some expansion from a global perspective. We are announcing availability in UK and Ireland here in EMEA for that service this year, as well as some additional functionality and support for containers and Kubernetes. So being able to provide HPE Cloud Volumes persistent storage for Kubernetes, so for containerized workloads that are running in the cloud. There's a number of announcements we've made around NVMe and storage class memory, and Vish can help me talk about that both on 3PAR as well as on Nimble. And then we have a number of things we've been doing in the big data side and secondary storage. So we have some new platforms that we're announcing. So the workhorse of our big data and analytics platforms is what we call the Apollo 4200 Gen 10. So we have a new version of that system that helps you address more storage-heavy big data and analytics workloads, for Cloudera, Hadoop, Hortonworks, MapR, a number of other things we do around some of the streaming and fast data workloads. We announced a new and expanded partnership with Cohesity. So they're here on the show floor. We'll be providing Cohesity solutions through the HPE channel on a number of different platforms aimed at some smaller remote office customers, essentially primary, secondary storage based on the DL380, and then more of an archive tier on our dense storage nodes, the Apollo 4510. So we've expanded that and have availability for that globally. And then we have some new offerings around storage in GreenLake. So for folks that want to do backup as a service, we now you're able to consume as a service in an elastic manner your primary storage, your secondary storage, as well as some of our ISV partners newly announced as Veeam, right? So you can get a soup to nuts as a service, backup as a service, DR as a service from Veeam through GreenLake, metered, and the abilities to flex up, flex down, flex out to the cloud. So a number of things that we have in here. We can start to dig into the specific points. I think that first of all, I'd like to introduce our colleague Omer Assad.
Fashionably late.
But consistent, Omer. But
Yes.
consistent.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Omer. I'm about 6.5 months old at HPE now. I'm responsible for the Nimble pieces of technology, and also responsible for how we sort of integrate Nimble with the rest of the portfolio stack. From an InfoSite and a cloud perspective with 3PAR and secondary storage portfolios.
Yeah, great. I'm going to put you on the spot right away, actually, because what we did is we did a pretty quick overview of where we are with the announcement, and the first thing that we let off was some new offerings that we have around InfoSight. So 2 weeks ago we talked about the support for InfoSight on our servers, right, Apollo and ProLiant servers, and how that's going to essentially move us farther up the stack for full stack analytics. But maybe if you want to talk about some of the things that we've done in AI ops around the resource planner, some of the additional things we've added to InfoSight in this release.
Right. Absolutely. No. The InfoSight team suddenly has become the center of the show at HPE from a technology perspective. Obviously, you heard Pat talk about the ProLiant server integration, so that data lake that we have behind InfoSight. In addition to that, we're extending upstream. We've already done the work with 3PAR, so now we sort of have workload profiles all the way from the backend storage perspective, the 3PAR perspective, and also now data points coming from a server perspective. This puts us in a very unique capability to do cross-stack analysis across the entire application stack. And what we now term this as mean time to innocence, which is very quickly identify in the application stack who's the guilty party, because admins have been the first one to be blamed. No, that's where the problem is. Now with sort of VM Vision and doing the AI modeling which allows us to do cross-stack analysis and also performance analysis in terms of doing a lot of what-if planning. So, okay, what if you change certain characteristics about the workload, or if you change the underlying hardware on this workload, where would this end up be, and how would this impact from a resource perspective? So it helps a lot with planning purposes. One of the, I don't know whether Pat has mentioned it already, Store Once, the backup portfolio is also integrated into InfoSight now, so that gives you all the way up to RPO, RTO sort of analysis from a singular tab from the InfoSight backend. This also has given a lot of interesting challenges to our data science team to now do cross-stack analysis and to do a lot of sort of noise analysis, data modeling at the backend from a learning and a deep learning perspective. And one of the things that we have been very fortunate to find out is now we can sort of get what the commonality of different workloads are. So, for example, if one customer is getting SQL data reduction at a certain levels, where do other customers stack as compared to that? So this gives our pre-sales engagement exercises much more intelligence when we go deal with our customers. It also helps our customers sort of stack rank themselves as to how they are getting data reduction across those different workloads. And also sort of mean time to latency analysis from different parts of the stack. And then in future, we want to then start to compare it across different customers as to what is the average sort of SQL latency or Oracle latency on Flash across the different portfolios. So.
Great, that's awesome, and I think what you'll see from us, I think some of the key points that Omer brought up is around data lake, right? Learning, gamification, continuous improvement from a customer perspective. The fact that we're able to take decades worth of data at this point between Store Once, servers, 3PAR, and certainly Nimble, and correlate those functions for customers and have them really benefit from that experience across a very large install base, where at this point we're talking hundreds of thousands of units that are out in the field, in the fleet, right? It's going to be something that will allow us to accelerate our experience for our customers moving forward. And not only extends into what we're doing on premises for customers, it also extends to this our what we call HPE Cloud Volumes, and it's a public cloud adjacent storage service. So I know that we've expanded support for Cloud Volumes here, not here in Spain, but here in EMEA, in UK and Ireland. I don't know if you want to talk for a minute about some of the integration that we just announced with Docker and Kubernetes and containerized. We've had a number of plugins and support for those type of applications on Nimble in the past, but now you can essentially boot that up in the public cloud. As of this week, we announced that.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a very important point. Thanks, Pat, for putting the plug-in for that. So as part of HPE Cloud Volumes, which is basically enterprise-level block storage service, so you can go to cloud.hpe.com, register yourself, and then you can start to allocate block storage enterprise grade volumes, which have snapshots, deduplication, compression, and 6 to 7 nines of availability all built in for your cloud native applications. You can attach that storage directly into Azure and Amazon EC2 instances, and then mount up your workloads and start to work. Once you create your sort of cloud volume accounts, it automatically discovers your on-prem HPE storage, and then allows you to replicate that data into HPE cloud volumes, and then from there you can, for DR purposes and workload mobility purposes, you can sort of start to bring up those workloads in public cloud compute. So one of the important points that Pat mentioned is both on the 3PAR side and also on the Nimble side, there is a very, very comprehensive set of container-based persistent storage integration plugins now available, which allow you for this workload mobility between on-prem and public cloud, right? And by having a single sort of shared fabric at the back end from a storage perspective, because that's one of the most complex parts of moving workloads in and out of clouds. And for 2019, one of the biggest roadmap items for InfoSight as well is not only cross-stack mobility, but also cross-cloud mobility. Because now you have this common block storage layer underneath, which sort of allows you to hook up as a service into Azure as well as Amazon. So as we sort of instrument the VMware stack, 2019 is all about instrumenting the cloud stack. So you can start to sort of give that cloud watch-like capabilities all the way up to enterprise workloads down into enterprise storage as well. So from an InfoSight perspective, your models at the back end as part of your workload analysis will tell you, hey, where does it best make sense to place this workload? You can place this on-prem, or you can place this within the public cloud, and then through the shared fabric, that entire enablement of mobility of that workload is going to be built in.
Great. So when you take a look at the pieces that we're putting together, not only from an InfoSight perspective on the experience we're giving customers, but as well as a very robust set of publicly available elastic cloud-based storage services. You'll see that as we go out through our 2019, we'll be introducing more around this concept of SaaS-based data management, a very hybrid approach to not only the data plane itself, so where the data sits, whether it's on-prem or off-prem, but giving that SaaS-based experience on how you manage that data, and certainly pull and learn from a very large group of customers that we have captive within our HPE ecosystem, and we'll be expanding it to new additional customers as well too. Another part of the announcement that we made today was around you see a lot of things on the show floor around memory-driven compute, memory-driven storage. So Vish, I don't know if you want to take us through a little bit of the announcements that we're doing around NVMe and storage class memory for 3PAR and for Nimble.
Yeah, absolutely, Pat. Thank you. So guys, the storage industry continues to be a hotbed of innovation, right? I think we continue to see all sorts of different technology enhancements come up. And I think in response to sort of the demands being placed on data today, right? And I think the storage industry on a whole is trying to rise to the challenge of meeting those demands, right? And so Pat alluded to memory-driven flash on both 3PAR and Nimble. And some of you may remember we showcased this technology a year and a half back at Discover, right, where we showed an Intel Optane card as a read cache on a 3PAR array. So that now is shipping, or will be shipping shortly. We're sort of announcing the GA of that, primarily in use as a read cache today. And the benefits we see with that solution is basically driving down latency. So on average, about a 50% reduction in latency, and also a very narrowing of the long tail of latency. So on the show floor, we have that being demonstrated. We also have some Oracle workloads where we've been able to show, up the Oracle stack, about a 37% reduction in latency, 27% increase in SQL statements execution, and about an 18% reduction in database time. So the less time you take on the database side, more time that's applicable to the application, right? And so those are the benefits you're seeing at the database level. And then Nimble's doing a tech preview, very similar to what we did at 3PAR a year ago. So I can very shortly you'll see that same technology being applied. And Nimble, with its Castle architecture, I think is very, very well suited to, again, bringing sort of all SCM, all storage class memory performance at the price of flash, right? So I think you can look forward to that here in the next coming months. A couple of other things I'll talk about with 3PAR. Performance insights as part of the AI approach. Some of you guys may have saw the announcement with SSMC 3.4 a couple of months ago, and now we have the ability to do very fine-grained performance analytics on-premise, right? Working closely with InfoSight on the cloud, we allow customers now to very quickly identify points of saturation and help them understand sort of how they compare to the rest of the world for a particular workload. The other thing we're announcing at the show now is data-in-place controller upgrades for the 3PAR 8000 series, where you can disassociate the scaling of compute from the scaling of capacity. And if you're compute bound and need more controller performance, you can upgrade those controllers online. And last and certainly not least is 32 gig fiber channel. Now the thing that's significant about this is this new HBA is going to be NVMe over Fabric ready. The memory-driven flash, of course, is based on NVMe and available on the existing 9000 and 20000 series 3PARs. Okay, so that's a quick flyby what we're announcing on 3PAR. As always, lots of stuff.
Yeah, Omar, I don't know if you want to touch on the SCM portion of the announcement for Nimble, and then mention a little bit on peer persistence as well too.
Yeah, sure. So the two big announcements on the Nimble portfolio are obviously the tech preview of storage class memory. So the same technology is coming on both of the arrays. But one of the things that we're really excited by is the introduction of peer persistence, which is synchronous replication on the Nimble portfolio as well. So that program's very successfully exited beta and starting at the end of Q1 going completely GA. So you will have the same peer persistence protocols that you have running from active DR perspective on the 3PAR portfolio will now be brought down as well onto the Nimble side of the house. And from a storage class memory perspective, again, one of the biggest breakthroughs when Nimble came to market was allowing you to consume flash at the price of disk, because that's one of the major properties of the Castle file system. But then with the all flash arrays, having the same architecture apply to all flash arrays, and then now sort of extending that to storage class memory is just following in the same portfolio footprints. So allowing you the capability to afford storage SCM based performance at the price of all flash is going to be fundamentally unique to Nimble going forward.
Great. So I think we covered a lot of things at a high level. I don't know if you guys want to open it up for some Q&A, or we can throw some topics out there.
I'm gonna throw what is an easy one for the two platform guys. A lot of the other array vendors are introducing NVMe SSDs. Why did we decide not to have that be the first thing we did, and why are we using SCM instead of going with NVMe SSDs?
So in my mind, the benefit of NVMe needs to be viewed end-to-end across the entire path and I/O traverses, right? From the host to the fabric, to the array controller, to the back-end media, right? So NVMe over SSD or NVMe NAND
full
gives
support
you...
of all the data services.
With full support of all the data services. Thank you, Pat, right? Including the host support, right? So NVMe NAND, I think, is a step in that journey. It does give you some benefits. Modest benefits, I think. I think if you are driving through latency, you'll see the highest benefits with NVMe and SCM. So I think NVMe NAND is a step on the journey. Will continue to be there, along with all the other elements.
From our perspective, I think one of the biggest bottlenecks we're seeing was we were front-end controller bound because that's one of the major properties of any deduplicating array. So I think most of the focus was placed on NVMe front ends that we've been working through. And from our perspective, when we did the I/O analysis, latency stack analysis, we weren't back-end bound at all in our architecture. Hence the move to go to commodity NVMe based SSDs, which then become available in the market. Again, one of the major focuses is on the software side of the house and not invest in customization of hardware at the back end. We certainly believe that from an industry perspective, relying on Intel, relying on Samsung to sort of stay abreast with that movement, and as we get access to all NVMe SSDs at the back end and just incorporate that in the architecture and then continue continue to ride that Intel TikTok cycle to keep it most price performance at the storage level. But then from a full data services level, there's a lot of investment in NVMe over Fabrics on the front end. You'll see a lot of those announcements coming out at the end of next year. You'll also see us do a complete end-to-end NVMe stack where sort of shelves are connected into the controllers over the NVMe fabric as well. And then but we also believe that in order to keep the jitter low on the latency envelope, I think the next step to just completely immerse ourselves into is the storage class memory and just get there as fast as possible.
Okay, guys, I've got a multi-tiered question here, actually, so I apologize if it takes me a couple of seconds to ask it. So, of the things you've just talked about,
we'll cache it properly.
Yeah, and it might be you slice it and take a piece each, something like that. But so you talked first of all about your cloud adjacent products, which seems to be the closest you're coming to any sort of public cloud type platform. Other vendors have started to put their software into the cloud, which is a debate we could have for about a day, I reckon, quite easily. Whether that's practical or not, who knows? But you're not quite going that far. So the first question is that deliberate? And are you going to, is that a very distinct scenario? But tied to that, you are spending a lot of time working with partners. You mentioned Cohesity, you mentioned Scality, and a lot of data is going to sit on those platforms from your clients. So how do those clients get the benefit of InfoSight? How do those clients get the benefit of InfoSight on those platforms where a lot of their data could be completely different from their primary stuff?
Yeah, so a couple answers to question number one. So we do run our software in the public cloud. So we do have some offerings, like for example, if you take a look at Store Once, we have not only do we have Cloud Bank, but that allows you to use the cloud as a tertiary long-term archiving tier for backup data. You can store it in an object format in S3. We can also run Store Once in the public cloud. One of the things that we're looking at right now, we've got some alphas and some customer testing right now, is actually taking portions of the software that sit within our storage systems and then using those as containerized services that can run in the public cloud. So if you think about things like, in the case of Store Once, you can do rehydration or indexing or, formatting of a certain data set to be able to affect a rapid restore, for example. So we do have some of our storage services today running in the public cloud in a software-only format. And then between myself and Omer, we're toying with some concepts of how to take some of those specific functions and run them as functions in the public cloud in a very on-demand, manner. So we don't have there's nothing I said sort of religious about not wanting to run the software in the cloud or not. And then there's always the distinct possibility of actually when you take a look at a model like Nimble Cloud Volumes, we run it in an adjacent co-location facility that is very close to the public cloud from a latency perspective. So it's got a private connect into Amazon, for example, sub 6, sub 5 millisecond type of latency. And there's no reason that we couldn't actually partner with public cloud vendors to run that same infrastructure in their clouds as well too. So there's nothing religious about wanting to run the software or not. And I think to your second question on the ecosystem play, if you take a look at vendors, for example, like Cohesity, they announced a similar type of service that InfoSight provides, but for Cohesity. We have actually established a work stream with them on how do we set up, they have well-known APIs for, accessing the data that our joint customers have. So being able to tie those together with InfoSight is a project that we're working on right now. And like when Omer said, having the ability to have Store Once data in the InfoSight data lake, allows us to be able to add conversations around the full data lifecycle management. So not only RTO and RPO, but archiving and how long your data's out there. And we'll be able to do that with vendors like Cohesity as well too. I forget the name of their cloud service that's around InfoSight. They just introduced it Helios. That's what it is. Yeah. So we're working on how to plumb those two services together.
So I wanted to take it added stab to that. So I'm so glad you asked that question because see, at the end of the day, the way so we have to have cloud services, right? Because customers will run certain workloads in the public cloud, certain workloads on-prem. We don't want to dictate that decision. That outcome should be financially driven, outcome driven, or whatever their business objective might be driven. The biggest challenge is where is the data? And data has a lot of gravity. So in order to be able to seamlessly move the data between public and on-prems is one of the major challenges to be solved. The second problem is, or the challenge for the customers is, they want enterprise class block data services. Now, how do you provide those? You can provide them by running a virtual machine of the software in the public cloud. That is a fine approach. NetApp does that. Quite a few. EMC did that. Recently Pure announced that as well. That's taking a version of their operating system and putting it in the public cloud. That is a fine way of allowing enterprise-grade storage services to be available in the public cloud. We certainly feel that the challenge with that is it does not fulfill the last tenet, which is running it as a service. Basically, when you're in the cloud, if you log into AWS console.aws.com, get into your cloud, and go, and from there you go, hey, I need storage. You click down, and you just provision a volume, and you're good to go. You're not in the business of managing arrays at that time, right? So our focus was to provide the customer the service. Right? So, and the service is they log on to the HPE portal and then they allocate a volume, and the volume appears and will connect to any of their compute services that can be coming from the service from a cloud perspective. So the outcome that we want to drive is a services-oriented outcome, right? And then and then also work with the customer to be able to understand how can we offer these as first-class services within the hyperscaler as well. Right? So that's the approach. We don't want the customer to manage the array if they have decided to move into the cloud. Because if they're in the cloud, they're not in the business of managing servers anymore. So similarly, they don't need to manage the goal is to have enterprise-grade block storage services, and click of a button, we provide that.
So you just mentioned one thing there about being more cloud native and actually having your products integrated within the cloud provider. Is that a strategy you're prepared to say that you're working on or you're intending to do?
Absolutely. Not only working, 100% committed to it, right?
Okay.
We need all HPE storage services. And when I mean all HPE storage services, that means enterprise class block storage service, to enterprise class data protection service, to enterprise class data management service, completely natively integrated with a hyperscaler. So at the end of the day, when the customer says, I want to protect some data, currently, if they're operating from a cloud environment, they can execute a nimble snapshot, and then they will be able to execute a 3-par snapshot. But they should not be able to tell whether it was a nimble snapshot or a 3-par snapshot. It was an enterprise block storage service snapshot, which has dedupe compression encryption offered in it, and it just happened. And it's operating at 6 nines of availability. In addition to that, I am committing to saying that when it comes to data protection services, we should not be differentiating between it's a nimble block device, it's an EBS block device, or it's a cloud bank object device. It should straight just say, I want to protect this workload, and if that workload happens to be plumbed via the HPE Cloud Console, the right underlying phenomena will happen. And then the third part of the strategy is following in StoreOne's footprints, all products, 3-par, nimble, any other products that we develop should be natively cloud connected. So that they should be able, that when I say mobility of data is between nimble, 3-par, S3, GCP, Azure, EBS. And they should move seamlessly between that. And that fabric, that data mobility fabric should be InfoSight managed.
So quick question. I was very, Kevin Jackson, Cloud Musings, I was very heartened to hear you say that it's all about understanding and managing the data. So when you're linking and working with hyperscale cloud service providers, how do you link this storage as a service, as you appropriately emphasize, with the governance of that data? More importantly, helping enterprises actually classify that data, ensure that the data is following data sovereignty requirements and so forth. I haven't seen that in the HPE portfolio.
That's an extremely important question. So the first step, it's a three-step journey. The first step is to manage. The first step is to extend the data mobility fabric, seamlessly rotating around all the on-prem platforms that we offer, and then connecting them to the public cloud. So what I meant was that a customer can have a data flow where they have Nimble or 3PAR volumes. They could be snapshotted and archived or backed up into S3 or Glacier. That's one workflow. Customers could have HPE cloud volumes, which are replicating and ingesting or moving data between on-prem arrays and cloud arrays, and then making them available in cloud compute. That's step number one. Step number two is to allow for all of these things to be managed from a data perspective. They should not be managed from a volume or a LUN or a file endpoint perspective. It should be all about the data and where is this data placed? Is it on the cloud tier? Is it on the local tier? Is it on the performance tier? Is it on the archival tier? Then you will see us introduce data services in hpe.cloud.com portal. And what that will, and so right now, if you go to cloud.hpe.com, you will see the block storage service in there, right? But that's the only service in there because that's the block storage service we provide. In addition to that, we want to provide something called like a compliance service, where you define your compliance guidelines, and then the service goes ahead on your behalf and looks on-prem data, looks at your cloud data and said, this is compliant, this is not compliant, and this is in violation of, let's say, GDPR or something like that, right? Then Store Once has been backing up into archiving from an S3 perspective and a Glacier perspective for about 2 years now, right? Nimble and 3PAR are getting along on that journey. So the compliance service should be able to peek into those data that is backed up via that, and then be able to peek into say, okay, this is in compliance, this is not in compliance, or this is, or for example, here you're storing a bunch of open format or unencrypted data, which should not be there. Would you like to go ahead and clean up that, right? The challenge for us is, because the storage portfolio exists in primary block, secondary storage, and in the public cloud, all our data services from a data protection and a data management perspective have to span all of them. Right. Right.
So I guess it needs to be an integrated platform in order to compliance, and that's what I'm looking for. What's the timeline for that integrated platform? Because without the integrated platform, you can't get compliance. If you don't do compliance, why should I go to HPE storage?
So from a compliance perspective, you can do compliance on-prem just fine.
No. Hyperscale cloud providers, hybrid IT environment.
Absolutely. So the first step of that is to connect the portfolio seamlessly to the cloud. That is happening in 2019. It has already happened for the secondary storage portfolio. It is going to be rolled out for the primary storage portfolio. That's the first step. The second step of that is then allowing the seamless data mobility between on-prem and public cloud, right? And early adopters will be the first one that will be coming in there, right? Then once this portfolio is ready, the first step of that is hpe.cloud.com. That portal, that platform is already ready and up and running. The next step of that is, as we go through the journey of 2019, add first data management, second data mobility, third data governance services on top of that. And those are going to be introduced in a service style, not as a VM or a license that you need to enable or any such thing.
Yeah, I will add that we are seeing customers now asking us to separate the data from the ability to run the application in the public cloud, right? For the same reasons that you talked about, right? Yeah, and so because of the data gravity, I think there are very differing methods of accomplishing that, but clearly delivering that as a service is coming across loud and clear, right? Otherwise, I might as well stay on-prem. If I'm gonna go administer another array in a colo or in a public cloud, right? Yeah, there's no point there.
Good.
For example, just like to a specific point on that journey, one of the things that we announced this week around HPE Cloud Volumes was that we have just completed SOC 2 certification for healthcare customers, right? So when you talk about adding on certifications, and it's an endemic part of the service, right? So we're able to provide that level of compliance for healthcare customers and their data to be able to understand where that data is, either on-prem or off-prem in HPE Cloud Volumes, and then be able to apply application and compute or function services from the public cloud. So that's another example of how we're making that journey today.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kati Lehmuskoski. So something we are seeing is that artificial intelligence and analytics are the future. So could you provide some practical use cases? In what kind of use cases customers could use this?
Yeah, it's certainly not computers playing, Go and chess, versus humans. I get kind of sick of those. We're very, very, I guess you'd say, I don't know, I guess you call it pedantic, but very practical about, the way that we're applying AI and AI ops to the platforms. So in its first iteration, InfoSight, is certainly a way to provide a much better and differentiated and scaling support experience, right? So we have a lot of customers that, they love the service because of its proactive support automation. But really at the end of the day, what you see from a thematic standpoint is recommendation engines, performance analysis, creating fingerprints. So all of these things from an AI perspective around learning and algorithms and the way we organize our teams within HPE, it's a concept called peak. So it's not only just being able to pull in a massive amount of telemetry that we have, which is an advantage, but also being able to apply data science to it and then work with a cross-functional team, right? So you have a developer, you have a QA person, you have a data scientist, you have a pre-sales person, you have post-sales integration engineer in a team that essentially works in a virtuous cycle to make the customer's experience better. So what we are able to do is by bringing that process as well as the technology, we can learn, from this very large amount of data that we have from our customers' perspective and essentially give them time back. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is automate the very mundane and time-consuming tasks that your people capital is the most expensive thing you're going to pay for, right, in your IT organization. And so unlocking those folks to be able to do higher bit order services like DevOps, continuous application development is, that's where we're squarely looking to provide incremental experiences with AI, which is essentially just giving people time back. A perfect example is backup, right? Yeah. So backup and data protection, right? Do you need to wake up every morning and check to see if your backups have completed, right? And if something does happen, what do you do to remediate? There's a lot of things that we can do to, automate that process, and we are automating that process to make it, a part of the infrastructure, and it's an endemic property. So for us, AI and is essentially making our systems much easier to manage, self-manage, and giving time back to the infrastructure, managers as well.
And Pat, in addition to the time back, I think there's also the aspect of some things are now humanly impossible to troubleshoot now, right? 10 data centers, 1,000 VMs in each data center distributed, and suddenly you find something goes wrong. How do you go diagnose? How do you go triage that quickly and effectively, right? And I think some of those things are humanly getting impossible now.
From an AI perspective, I think we generally try to quantify this statement a little bit more. From an AI perspective, at the end of the day, the goal is to provide the customer the highest level of service. The highest level of service could be in customer support, it could be in performance and reliability, and it could be around customer experience. And the fourth one, what we say, is end customer outcomes. Breaking AI down further from an InfoSight perspective is analytics in form of deep learning and modeling and machine learning. Those are the three specific things that we work with. We have a comprehensive comprehensive team of data scientists. As Pat mentioned, the concept is called the peak team. The peak teams are developers, QA engineers, and now especially support engineers working in small teams to look at the telemetry that our systems are sending from a customer locations. Started with Nimble, added 3PAR, servers, and the journey continues. The point is that the data lake continues to get richer. As a result of that, a lot of data scientists start to develop performance models. They start to develop bug identification models. So fingerprinting is a good example. You see a bug hit a customer, develop a fingerprint, scan across the entire customer base, proactively push updates to those guys, make sure they never get into that. Another aspect of that modeling and that data learning is that when a customer calls in, you're able to pick up the phone on the second ring, eliminate level 1, level 2 support, and not ask ridiculous questions like, did you move this out of the data path? Did you reboot this machine? Give me the logs, give me this, because we already have all that information. And then be immediately able to troubleshoot and say, yep, this is a challenge in this part of the stack, and this is how the problem is manifesting itself. Should you apply this thing, it should go away. Would you like us to apply it for you? So that's a big part of analytics and providing the best level of support at the back end. The third piece is then going ahead and introducing and implementing these models for real-time analysis on the arrays themselves. And that's one of the biggest things that 3PAR sort of brought out recently as part of what they call Project Ultron, which is allowing for real-time data modeling to be happening on the array, because that's where the performance is being experienced by the customer, right? And understanding latency, understanding performance capabilities, understanding the load on different arrays as they behave in the cluster, and then syncing that information back with a model that is trained back at the central cloud and also subtrained and pushed out as execution models on the array itself, right? So that's the sort of the edge component being brought right into the array, and the cloud being our central InfoSight cloud. Then the fourth aspect is using or helping customers drive their own outcomes with artificial intelligence, and that's where the Apollo servers, the data intensive server line that comes into play, both with InfoSight integration, and in addition to that, NVIDIA GPU integration to allow for customers to keeping those GPUs fed and busy as much as possible, right? So it appears in all parts of the stack. We necessarily sometimes try to avoid the use of AI everything, the buzzword, so as to say, but the concrete use cases are in modeling, deep learning, training the models through the customer data that we have gathered, and then exposing those models through InfoSight back to the customer to minimize their downtime, eliminate outages, enhance customer experience, and drive the best SLA for the customer.
So I want to take us into the weeds just a little bit, sure. Particularly around the Nimble peer persistence announcement. Curious if it's creative marketing reuse, or if we're talking feature parity between what peer persistence is in the 3PAR line and what you're talking about here. Is it Metro storage clustering for VMware? Is it also the Windows operating system line? Kind of give us a little more information around what that is, and then I've got a second question too.
Absolutely. So the class of products from an HPE perspective is called peer persistence. There are different levels of peer persistence technology that is available on 3PAR, and it is pretty comprehensive. From a Nimble perspective, it's active-active synchronous replication between two sites. That's step number one. Is going to support VMware active-active clustering. It's going to support SQL, Microsoft SQL Suite. Then followed quickly by the Oracle certification. It's going to have automatic failover and DR built into it. And then basically, we have to basically then sequence out the roadmap as to how we then completely bring that capability onto the Nimble platform as well. The first step of this is basically active-active controllers on two sites, 5 milliseconds minimum latency time, and allowing for automatic failover of applications on that. That's step number one. And the applications that are being certified are VMware Metro Cluster and the Microsoft SQL suite of products. And then we're going to pace out this roadmap over 2019 and early part of 2020 to take it from step one, step two to basically active on both controllers and allowing for customers to read write on both sides.
So with the memory-driven flash and your introduction of storage class memory, where do you see NVMe fitting into the future roadmap? Because you say you're kind of happy that you didn't go NVMe first from a back-end standpoint, and I understand the rationale there, but where do you see it fitting in? Is it a maturity issue? Are you waiting for protocols and things to be developed, standards to be developed?
So all of the above, right? So NVMe has clearly back-end semantics for both NAND and SCM media. And then there's NVMe over Fabric, both as a enclosure expansion as well as NVMe Fabric to the front end, right? And very closely tied to that is a whole series of different RDMA protocols, right? Now, whether that's going to be something like Rocky or Fiber Channel with NVMe. There's also other competing standards like iWarp, right? And so I think you're going to see, like in all prior I/O wars, 3 or 4 solutions, and they're going to shake out, right? Our bets are going to be with Fiber Channel and Rocky V2, okay, for NVMe or Fabric. And I think today, I mean, just the standards are being ratified. Multi-pathing, for example, with NVMe or Fabric is barely starting, right? And so as we start to see these things mature and evolve, we'll make them available, right? NVMe NAND is on the roadmap. NVMe SCM is on the roadmap. NVMe Fabric is on the roadmap. It's a question of timing.
From our perspective, I think at the end of the day, we look at where the customers are hitting most of the bottlenecks from our perspective. InfoSight is a great asset to be able to do that back-end workload analysis. We can one of the benefits of InfoSight is you can literally log in, create a sort of a view, and then completely go look at what is the array business across the customer base, right? What we see is that most of the arrays are actually controller bound, right? Because it's a deduplicating architecture with all flash. That's what we prefer, right? They're not actually at the back end bound. NVMe inside the array actually solves the problem of allowing for the back end bottleneck to go away. We didn't see that across the board. So as a result of that, an internal decision was, do you really want to wait for NVMe over Fabrics to really mature up from a standards protocol perspective, and then have a clean protocol to go out and implement from the front end? Because we certainly see certain customers, although the back end is not bottlenecked at all, but we definitely see customers, hey, I want the latency envelope around 500 microseconds, but I want the jitter to go away. I want the noise to go away. When we looked at that, what can we bring from a storage perspective without actually getting embattled into the NVMe over Fabric standards wars and how we're involved in that. We're going to support whatever standard comes out. The easiest thing over there was to just completely because internally the arrays were not bottlenecked at the back end, to leapfrog and said, okay, well, how can we solve the controller bottleneck? And the controller bottleneck happened to be a lucky decision to be able to figure out, okay, if you put storage class memory over there, and I can answer from a nimble architecture perspective, the Castle architecture naturally lends itself to be able to tier internally inside of the controller. It just happened to be the right move. But from our perspective, there's no sort of saying, hey, NVMe is a bad thing or we're not going to do that. Absolutely. Anybody who's back-end controller bottleneck, that's the first thing that they should go solve that. From our perspective, we just saw that we're gonna get the same benefit with NVMe-based SSDs, which we're gonna get from our suppliers, and then from our perspective, just solve the front-end problem right away, and that happened to be aligning on SCM.
So you bring up an interesting point around the controllers, the front end being your bottleneck at this point. Are we close to a tipping point from a technology standpoint where your data services are getting in the way?
I think the latency envelope now is significantly reduced, and the innovation is going to be how do you do software data services with that reduced latency envelope, right? And I think that's going to be key. I think some of the data services will have to change. Some of it's going to have to innovate to operate in that envelope, right? And this is where things like the ability to scale controllers, multiple controllers, active controllers really start to matter as well, right? Those technologies become key.
I think you're absolutely right. That's the reason we had to go to adaptive compression. We have to adapt compression based on the stream that's coming in, and all the way from LZ0 to LZ7, figure out the right one to apply. That's because and adaptive deduplication, adaptive compression, because all data services need an encryption, all data services need to be on at all times, right? So as the latency envelope gets tighter and tighter and the customers lose their patience for latency jitter, absolutely, you're right. So as a result of that, the data services either can get into the way and you can start shutting them down, or the other approach is to start to make them, all of them, adaptive. And starting with adaptive dedupe and adaptive compression was the first step that we did this year with the NimbleOS 5 release.
Quick question on the storage side of things. Like when you talked about the fabric, how does simplicity fit into that discussion, if at all?
Absolutely. So from a fabric perspective, so simplicity. So simplicity caters to the hyper-converged portfolio from HPE. At the end of the day, there are certain benefits of being part of a portfolio full stack offering, right? It is that from a vendor perspective, you're able to participate, which you're able to avoid a religious discussion with the customer and offer the right solution on a consultative basis to what the customer wants. So from a simplicity perspective, and I apologize because I didn't mention that when I was answering the compliance question, the goal is to have a data mobility fabric, right? Now this data mobility fabric, we are very conscious of the fact, should not only be dependent on VMware vMotion. That if the customer is running virtualized workloads on a hyper-converged architecture, happens to be simplicity, and suddenly that workload performance needs to excel, yeah, they can vMotion it onto a Nimble, they can vMotion it onto a 3PAR and go from there. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that all flash simplicity portfolio will not give you the performance that you want, but for certain bare metal workloads, you want the thing to run on a different architecture. So from our perspective, the step is to link the three, which is Nimble, 3PAR, and starting with store once first and then bringing simplicity into the fabric. But the advantage of simplicity is that most of simplicity's requirements of linking into the fabric are satisfied by VMware vMotion. Whereas when you have a raw LUN being accessed on a 3PAR and then now suddenly customer wants to do test and dev on Nimble, that doesn't work. Right? So we literally want to be able to provide that, take a snapshot, replicate to a Nimble, clone, and off you go. All of that should be applicable from a SaaS data management plane. And the data management discussion should be completely bifurcated and separate from a platform discussion. So that's
Yeah, that was one of my questions. I heard about cloud, and it's one click. We need to move data to the cloud from a Nimble and a 3PAR. But what about 3PAR and Nimble itself? Because there's no data mobility whatsoever.
It's going to be a beautiful 2019.
Okay, don't say that it's RMC, please. You mentioned cloud volumes coming to Europe. I'm sorry, but the UKI in, I think, 5 months is not Europe anymore with the Brexit. So
we are painfully aware of that. We need to open up a second region. Yes.
So there will be other regions as well.
There will be other regions outside of UK and I. The challenge for Ashish, who's the general manager for cloud services, is to figure out how to prioritize between rest of Europe, Australia and Singapore. So we're
but that's not Europe either. So
that's not Europe either. So we're anxiously waiting for Ashish to drop the mic on that.
Yeah. Okay. In 3PAR, SCM. So it's a module because there was already 18 months ago that showcase.
Yes.
But how will it be a Nimble? Because there's no space for modules or whatsoever. So will it be a new controller or other DIMMs in the controller?
So there is space. It's just not visible. Have you seen how tall the controller
I know the controller, yeah.
Right. So on top there is space. But for SCM purposes, there is most probably going to be a newer controller.
Because it was just the announcement of the Gen 5 hardware. So
right.
Would it be already Gen 6 or a Gen 5 Plus?
So I don't want to go into the specific details because those things are being layered out. But here's what I can tell you. It's going to follow the timeless approach. So customers that have timeless should not have a problem with that anytime upgrades. And it's going to be a data in place upgrade if it happens to be a new controller. Now, whether it's a DIM decision or a controller decision, we should know that fairly shortly.
Okay. Last one for me, at least now. As with simplicity, which is storage but not storage, and should we move data, yes or no? The same thing is with InfoSight, because InfoSight is nimble and now tripar and is going to servers, and InfoSight will be everywhere. How long will it stay in the storage BU?
So InfoSight is it's all about the data. Yeah. So I think InfoSight is taking a little bit a more aggressive approach even than what you described. The first, so there is InfoSight being extended to different services, right? InfoSight goes into 3PAR, InfoSight goes into store ones, InfoSight goes into servers, right? That's where InfoSight is collecting data. Now for this effort to scale, InfoSight itself is already well advanced on this journey called platformization of InfoSight. So InfoSight itself will become a data platform with analytics and data science and engines offered within itself as a service. Then it is up to, right now, InfoSight team does a lot of the work in order to bring a platform on board. We really need to quickly get away from that model. So the goal is to convert InfoSight very quickly at the back end, and that's what 90% of the InfoSight team is busy now doing, is to convert that into a platform so that any sort of third-party product, or maybe within HP portfolio, maybe outside of HP portfolio, can quickly come programmed to those APIs and start to take utilization of all the capabilities that InfoSight brings to the table. Right. So now, from a P&L perspective, it's its own P&L. As cost of support. Now, whether it sits within storage or outside of storage, doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, through general managers, we all report up to Antonio. So,
we're going to have to wrap it up because we need to stay on time. There's another coffee talk at 11, is it?